So about a week ago, I was surfing through Craigslist to buy a new phone. After searching for a bit, I found the perfect deal. A new iPhone 12 for only $400 with battery life of 95%. I thought I found the best deal and tried to contact the person. I called him several times, but he didn't respond. Over the next couple of days, I continued to message him, but he still didn't respond. But after a week, he finally did. He texted me, but he only sent me his address, which was weird. Also, when I responded, he didn't say anything after that. I didn't think much of it, and next day, I decided to go to this guy's house. When driving to his house, it seemed like nobody lived in any house on the street. But ignoring that red flag, I went to his house. When I arrived, the house was dark, the wood was old and uneven. When walking to the front door, I noticed the grass was uncut and rough, it literally went up to my knees. When I approached the front door, it was already open. I looked inside and there was a man sitting in a rocking chair. He asked me in a deep voice who I was. I told him about the phone and he stood up from the chair and came to the door. I walked up and gave him the money. He snatched it from me and slammed the door in my face. I started to yell in anger, but he didn't open the door. After a few minutes of banging, he opened the door and he just stuck his arm out with the phone. I grabbed it and asked about his name. He paused for a moment and said his name was John Smith. After that, I turned around and walked away, but I didn't hear him close the door. When I turned on my car, I looked at the door and I saw him. I saw him staring at me with his deadly eyes. I put all my weight on the gas pedal and floored it down the street. When I got home, I was way too tired to actually set up the phone, so I fell asleep once my head hit the pillow. When I woke up, I decided to turn the phone on. But I noticed something strange, something unusual. I noticed that the phone was still signed in with the last person. So feeling a little nosy and curious, I opened the phone. After opening the phone and going to the home page, I immediately went to the Photos app. After opening the app, there was nothing, there were no photos in the camera roll. After that, I went to the photo albums and I found something. The photo album was named A Fun Night. There were only 2 videos, both with a black thumbnail. Then I did something I still regret. I played the first video. When the first video started to play, it was a black screen. The only sound I heard was soft rain. After a few seconds, the camera quickly panned up. The camera was turned to look at a car outside. The camera stayed fixed on that car for more than 30 seconds. Then a woman actually opened the car door and got out of the car. The camera wouldn't move away from her, and after a minute, a man started laughing in the background and started talking with her. That voice was the same as the man that sold me that phone. After the first video ended, I went to the second video. I noticed this one was exponentially longer than the first one. While the first one was 2 minutes long, this one was 7 minutes. The same thing happened like in the first one. It started out as a black screen with rain in the background, but the difference was, it was in an abandoned warehouse. Then around 45 seconds in, I heard soft crying. I could hear a man shouting and abusing the women. After a few seconds, the camera panned to look at the woman. He stood the camera up against the wall and she was the same woman that got out of the car. I started to become lightheaded looking at that. I was curious whether it was a prank or if that man actually kidnapped a woman. The man was physically abusing the women, and I got so angry looking at that. After a minute, my anger turned into fear. The man then grabbed a knife out of his pocket and cut the rope around her mouth. He moved the knife around her jawline and blood started to leak out under her chin. Then he dropped the knife and started to choke her. After a few seconds, she stopped moving. He then started walking towards the camera and said, "Wasn't this fun?" After that, the video ended. I jumped out of my bed and drove to the police station in a hurry. I explained everything to the police and gave them the whereabouts of the man. The man was convicted of murder and is now in prison for life. It has been few weeks since that incident and I still can't figure out why he gave me the phone without deleting the videos. So a year ago, I worked for someone I responded to on Craigslist. I was scouring the internet for some sort of paying gig, I didn't really care what. Then I came across a post on Craigslist. Someone was looking for a person to come by and feed their pets. I assumed they were going out of town or something, so I contacted them and left my number through email. I got a response immediately in the form of a phone call. The caller was a man who explained to me that he was moving out of town and his parents had cats to fed daily. I gave the man my name so he could run me through a cursory background check, and in about 20 minutes, I was hired. I went to the house next morning to get all the instructions and met the man I'd spoken to on the phone. His name was Ben. Ben explained to me that he would no longer be able to care for his parents' cats and that his parents needed to focus on themselves. The money would be left on the kitchen table at the end of every week, $200 a week just to feed some cats. In addition to that, money for more cat food would be left for me as needed. Then he told me the first thing that I thought was strange. I was to come at 10:50 a.m. every day and be gone by 11 a.m. anyhow. Also, I was prohibited from interacting with his parents. He told me that when I was in their home, they would be in their chairs in the living room and that I was not to disturb them. He asked if any of that would be a problem, to which I assured him it wouldn't. He then showed me the area in which the cats eat. I was also told not to explore further in the house, which I promised him wouldn't be a problem. And with that, he expressed his hope that I could be trusted and told me to be there at 10:50 a.m. every day, starting tomorrow. The next day came. I went inside at exactly 10:50 a.m. I walked into the house, and immediately to my right, there were Ben's parents, sitting in recliners. I announced my presence but they ignored me, and I made my way to the kitchen. I fed the cats and before 11 a.m., I left the house as instructed. This exact same scenario played out countless times over the next few months. Then one day, I arrived late at the house around 10:58 a.m. I entered and apologized to Ben's parents for being late, to which I once again got no response. They were as usual just sitting in their chairs watching their game show. I went to the kitchen and fed the cats. I looked at my phone and it was 11:15 a.m. I walked down the hall towards the front door. When I reached the living room, Ben's parents were now standing in the dark behind their chairs, staring directly at me. I apologized for running late and got out of there without saying any extra words. I went back the next day on time, and everything was fine. A few more months went by of nothing strange, and then came the last day I was there. I got there at 10:53, but I wasn't worried because I knew I could be out before 11 p.m. The problem came when I was in the kitchen and I heard someone asking for help. It scared me and I looked around for the source of the cry for help. I saw no one around, but I heard it again. I began looking around, before realizing I was running behind time. I looked at my phone and it was 11 p.m. My heart sank to my stomach when I looked down the hallway and saw Ben's parents for the first time in the light. They were grossly emaciated and pale, looking completely malnourished. They were essentially walking skeletons. I apologized for taking so long and said I'd be on my way, but they just stood there, blocking the way to the front door. I said I would take the back door, which was located in the kitchen, but when I went to open it, I found that it required a key to open from the inside. It was at this point that true panic set in. I looked behind me, and Ben's parents were now about a half a foot away from the entrance to the kitchen. I had nowhere else to go except what I presumed was a door to a pantry. Ben's parents had blank stares across their faces, and their eyes looked as if life had left them a long time ago. In a last-ditch effort, I went to the door that I thought was a pantry, but instead there was a staircase leading into a basement. As soon as I opened the door, there was a very disgusting smell. I carefully went down the stairs and looked for a window, but there was not a single window down there. I looked back up the stairs, and the parents were now standing next to each other at the top of the stairs. I pulled out my phone and called 911, not knowing what else to do. When I explained my situation, they said they would send a car out immediately, and to stay on the phone while they connected me to the unit en route. I ran into the dark basement using my phone as a light, but it didn't provide too much illumination. There were a bunch of junks there and the smell was killing me down there. I turned around and shined the light in front of me, and I was inches away from Ben's parents. I let out a scream and ran in the other direction. I tripped over something and my phone flew away from my hand. It landed face down so I couldn't find it. I ran back up the stairs and into the kitchen. I looked back and saw the parents standing at the bottom of the stairs. I ran towards the front door and opened it. There I saw the cops standing right in front of me. I was in so panic that I pushed past them to get outside of the house. I looked in the window and saw the parents sitting in their chairs, watching their game show. I explained that these crazy old people had trapped me in their house and were chasing me around. The cop went in to talk to the parents and look around while I sat in the police car. He came back out about 5 minutes later and asked if I was sure someone was chasing me. I said yes, I was absolutely sure that it was the 2 old people that lived there. He informed me that the people in the chairs have been dead for quite some time. I asked what the smell in the basement was, and he said there was another body down there. Backup showed up. I gave them my statement and explained how I'd been coming there every day for months and months to feed the cats. I told them to call Ben, but it was disconnected. I only found out a few days later that the dead body in the basement was of Ben's. So this story takes place back in the summer of 2021. During that time, I had just recently gotten a new car. Before that I had been driving an old 2004 Chevy Trailblazer, which if you don't know is an SUV. I didn't think that it would be worth that much, but still, I decided to sell it on Craigslist. I took some pictures out in my driveway and then listed the car. It ran pretty well and was very reliable, so I knew that somebody would be interested. I listed it for $2,000 and waited. I wasn't in that much of a rush to sell it, and it took about 2 days before I got the first response to the ad. The response was someone asking if the car was still for sale. I said yes, and they texted back asking if they could take a look at it. We then arranged a meeting after the person got off work the following day. I asked for their name and he said his name was Barry. He said that he got off of work at 8 p.m., and I suggested that we meet in the parking lot of a nearby Walmart because it was a really big lot. It would also be in a public area because I didn't want a random person showing up at my house. Barry agreed, and the very next day I drove out to the Walmart, which was like 5 minutes away from my house. I got there early and looked around the parking lot. I told him that I was in the very back corner and I waited for him there. The first red flag happened before Barry even showed up. He texted me saying that he was there and was asking what my car looked like. It was weird that the person who was interested in buying the car doesn't remember the color of the car. I gave him a description, then he replied saying that he saw me and was driving over. I looked around and watched a much newer looking car approach me. It looked to be a red Ford Focus that was only a few years old. He parked right next to me and I watched a man get out. He was younger looking, maybe 30, and had dark brown hair. I walked over to him and we met out in front of my car. We shook hands and I told him some basic information about the car. Less than a minute in, he asked me if we could go for a test drive. I said yes, and Barry got into the driver's seat of my car and I got into the passenger seat. I noticed that he was on his phone a lot in the short time. When he started driving, I asked him if he knew this area. He said that he knew it well, and we left the Walmart and headed to a quieter area. Barry went down a road that I had only been on a couple of times. It was a somewhat quiet road with a speed limit of 35. There were some patches of woods and some buildings that seemed to be industrial. During the drive, things were pretty quiet. I talked about the car for the first couple of minutes, but Barry didn't really respond or said anything back to me. I remember him looking at his phone a lot while driving, and I told him that he shouldn't do that. He apologized to me and then put it away. I asked him about the car and he said he really liked it. After maybe 5 minutes of driving, I was starting to think that we should head back. That's when Barry suddenly began slowing down and pulled off the road and into a really crappy looking parking lot. There were kind of woods on both sides of the road, which lead to the parking lot. When we reached the parking lot, I noticed that 2 cars were parked there. I thought at first maybe Barry just wanted to turn around, but when he stopped the car, I was really confused. Barry then shut off the engine and took the key out of the ignition. Then he opened up his driver's door and started to get out. I was really confused and was just watching him, wondering what was going on. As he was getting out, he then suddenly yelled at me to get out of the car. I looked to my right and saw 3 men getting out of the other vehicle. They started walking towards me and they were maybe like 50 feet away. These men started walking at a fast pace and Barry stepped out in front of my car. He then waved at me to get out and I knew that I was in trouble at that point. I didn't know what these guys wanted, but I realized something quickly. My car had 2 keys for it and I had brought the spare just in case I would have sold it. That night it was in my pocket. After Barry saw that I was not getting out of the car, he started walking over to my passenger's door. I figured that he was going to try to force me out. Meanwhile, the other 3 men were now only about 20 feet away. I reached in my pocket and pressed the button to lock the doors. I pushed it, and when Barry got closer, I moved over into the driver's seat of the car. He reached the door and tried opening it, but it was locked. At that moment, I quickly put my spare key into the ignition and started the engine. Barry had the other key still and would be able to unlock it. I saw him reaching into his pocket and saw the other man start running as soon as the car started up. I put it into drive and slammed my foot on the gas. The car moved away from everyone and they gave chase on foot for a short time before I sped away. I then made a quick U-turn as the men were now running for their vehicle. I drove out of that parking lot as fast as I could, and then back onto the road. I took the very first turn that I saw from that road, and those men were not able to reach me in their car on time. I didn't see them behind me and was able to get away. I went straight back to my house, and when I made it back home, I called the police and reported the whole thing. I told them about the car at Walmart that Barry had left and gave as much information as I could. I later found out that the car Barry used to get to Walmart was still there, and turned out it was a stolen car. I'm not sure if Barry and those other guys were ever found. I'm just really glad that I had the spare key with me and was able to get away from them.